The smell of fresh coffee and the gentle sound of pages turning were part of my morning routine in the office. As I reviewed charts, sunlight filtered through the curtains, creating a cozy, almost sleepy atmosphere. I was lost in my thoughts, planning the day ahead, when the doors suddenly opened. A familiar figure entered, and my heart stopped for a moment. Miguel? Sophie's sweet and unmistakable voice broke the silence of the office. I looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to rewind. Sophie, my former girlfriend, stood there with a look that mixed nervousness and determination. The years hadn't been kind, but her essence remained the same, those traits I had loved so much in the past. "Sophie," I managed to say, trying to hide the surprise shaking me inside. "How long has it been?" "I know it's been a long time." She took a deep breath as if preparing for something important. "I need to talk to you. It's about something serious." I invited her to sit, my heart racing. The first question that came to mind was what could be so urgent. As she settled into the chair, I observed her eyes, which reflected a mix of worry and hope. "What happened?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "It's about Lucas, my son." The revelation hit me like a bucket of cold water. What was she saying? A son? Lucas? I repeated, more to myself than to her. "You have a son?" She nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of tears and emotion. "He's 6 years old, and I believe you are his father." The world around me began to spin. I knew her well enough to know she wasn't joking. What I feared most, a distant echo of my past, had become a reality. I remembered our relationship, the promises we made to each other, and how everything had ended. "This can't be true, Sophie." Denial escaped my lips. "How can you be sure?" "I know it's hard to believe." She ran her hand through her hair, nervous. "But he looks a lot like you. And I always knew I would have to tell you someday." "Why now? Why not before?" Frustration began to mix with confusion. "I wanted to protect Lucas." She looked down as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. "But I realized he needs to know his father. And you need to know him." Memories began to flow through my mind, fragments of a time that seemed so distant. I remembered the laughter, the plans we made together, and the love we shared. But I also remembered the fear that made me run away, the idea of building a life with her. Now, all of that seemed so irrelevant in the face of the reality unfolding before me. "Sophie, this is..." I hesitated, searching for words. "This is a shock. I don't know what to say. I know it's complicated, and I don't expect you to have answers right now." She looked up, and there was a vulnerability in her eyes that touched me. "But I had to be honest with you." Silence settled between us, heavy and laden with unspoken emotions. I looked out the window at the city that continued its frantic routine, oblivious to the whirlwind unfolding inside me. "Does this mean I am a father?" The words sounded strange and distant. "Yes, Miguel. And I hope you can give this a chance." She leaned forward, her expression pleading for understanding. "Lucas needs you." Deep down, a part of me wanted to believe there was a path to take, but another part was terrified of the idea of taking on such a big responsibility. What would I do? How could I handle this? The life that seemed so well structured until that moment suddenly became a maze of emotions and uncertainties. "I need time to think." I finally managed to say. "I understand," Sophie responded, nodding. But the sadness in her eyes was undeniable. "I'll be here when you're ready." And as she got up to leave, my heart tightened. Somehow, life had decided that I couldn't escape my past so easily. The smell of fresh coffee filled my nostrils as soon as I entered the small corner cafe. The place, with its exposed brick walls and rustic wooden tables, always had a special charm. It was a refuge in the hustle and bustle of the city, and that day, I really needed a place to think. I sat at a table near the window, watching people pass by, each with their own stories, their own lives. But my life, at that moment, seemed a tangle of confusion and uncertainty. When Sophie entered, my heart jumped. She looked so different and yet so familiar. Her loose hair fell over her shoulders, and her look, though laden with worry, still had a sparkle I hadn't seen in years. She approached and sat across from me, the tension between us almost palpable. "Thank you for coming, Miguel," she began, her voice trembling. I know this is unexpected, but I needed you to know. I'm still trying to understand all this, Sophie, I replied, trying to stay calm. How did you find me? Why now? She took a deep breath, as if preparing for a deep dive. Lucas, he's your son, Miguel. I couldn't hide this any longer. He needs to know his father. My stomach turned. The idea of being the father of a child I never knew existed left me lost. But what if he doesn't want to meet me? What if I'm not the father he needs? I asked, my anguish evident in my voice. He looks a lot like you, Sophie said, a sad smile forming on her lips. And I always knew that one day you would have to know. He deserves this. And you? What happened between us, Sophie? I didn't know you had left me a legacy. The word legacy came out as a whisper, heavy and full of meaning. She looked away, her hands trembling on the table. Life happened, Miguel. I was alone and didn't know how to tell you. I wanted to protect you, and myself, from a complicated past. But I shouldn't have done that. The silence between us stretched, heavy as a cloud. I remembered our moments together, the promises made, and the paths we chose. You could have reached out to me, I said, a little more bitterly than I intended. I was willing to listen to you. I know, and I'm sorry for that. But I was afraid. Afraid of how you would react, of how it could affect your life. You were always so focused on your career, on Clara. She spoke quickly, as if the words were a way to protect herself. Clara, I murmured, the name of my daughter bringing me back to reality. Sophie's look told me she knew there was more at stake. She can't know about this yet. Not now, Sophie nodded, but her expression showed she didn't completely agree. She has the right to know, Miguel. And so do you. Lucas is part of you, part of your life now. The idea of Lucas, a child I didn't know, invading my world and somehow challenging the relationship I had with Clara was overwhelming. I can't just appear in his life. What if he doesn't accept me? What if Clara resents me? Worry took hold of me. That's something you'll have to face. I can't do it for you, but I'll be by your side, Miguel. We can do this together. The determination in her voice gave me a small boost of hope, but uncertainty still hung in the air. What if Clara finds out some other way? I don't want her to feel betrayed. Then you need to be honest with her, Miguel. The truth always finds a way to come out. I looked out the window, watching life go by. What had once been a peaceful routine was now turning into a storm of emotions. How could I handle all this? How could I be the father Lucas deserved and, at the same time, protect Clara? Life wasn't fair, and that revelation only made things more complicated. I need to think more about this, I said, trying to gather my thoughts. I can't decide anything now. Sophie nodded, understanding the internal struggle I was facing. I understand. But remember, Miguel, Lucas isn't a threat. He's a part of you. And I believe, deep down, you know that. As we got up and headed out of the cafe, a new reality was unfolding before us. The journey was just beginning, and the future was uncertain. But I knew I would have to face it, not just for myself, but for Clara and Lucas. What I didn't know was that the confrontations and revelations were just beginning. Sitting in my office, the usual silence was broken by an agonizing thought that wouldn't leave me alone. Sophie's revelation echoed in my mind like a dissonant symphony that I couldn't silence. How could I be the father of a boy I didn't know existed? And if all this became an unbearable burden? My fingers nervously tapped on the desk as I analyzed the charts that, at that moment, seemed unreal, as if everything around me was a mirage. The office door opened, and like a reflection of what tormented me, Sophie entered again. Her look, a mix of insecurity and determination, gave me a chill. She sat down, the tension hanging in the air like a storm about to erupt. Miguel, we need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. About what, Sophie? I asked, trying to stay calm, though my heart was racing. About Lucas? I don't know if I'm ready for this. She took a deep breath, her eyes tearful. I understand this is a lot for you, but Lucas needs a father, and I believe you can be that father. And Clara? What am I going to tell her? The question came out harsher than I intended, but the concern for my daughter was overwhelming. Sophie leaned forward, her hands clasped together. She will understand. With time, Miguel, you just need to be honest with her. Honest. Her words reverberated inside me. But could I be honest with Clara, knowing that the revelation could break the trust we had built over the years? I don't know if I can, I murmured, looking away. It's all so confusing. How can I become a father to Lucas now when I barely know this child? Sophie looked at me with an intense gaze. He's more like you than you think, Miguel. He has your smile. I just want you to meet your son. What you decide after that is your choice. Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. A son. What did that mean for me? The responsibility, the love, the fear of failing. All of it mixed into a storm of emotions. And if Clara doesn't accept it? If she feels betrayed by me? I asked, my voice breaking. Sophie hesitated, as if the words she was about to say were a weight. I have a secret. Something about Lucas that could change everything. But it's hard to share. The tone of her voice left me uneasy. What could it be? What else didn't I know? Sophie, please. If we're going to do this, we need to be transparent with each other. She took a deep breath but said nothing. The tension in the air was palpable, and I knew her answer could be the key to everything. Miguel, I just want you to know that I'm not here to pressure you. I just want you to meet Lucas. The rest, I hope time will resolve. Silence settled between us as I pondered her words. The idea of meeting my son, seeing a part of me, was tempting, but the shadows of fear and uncertainty continued to haunt me. I'll think about it, I finally said, trying to put a note of firmness in my voice. Just that? I'm not going to hear a yes? Sophie seemed frustrated, and I understood. She was fighting for her son, and I was hesitating. I just need my time, I replied, feeling the pressure mounting. She stood up, and the sadness in her eyes was almost palpable. I hope you make the right decision, Miguel. For Lucas and for yourself. As she left, I felt paralyzed, trapped between a past I couldn't forget and an uncertain future that was approaching. What did I really want? And, more importantly, what should I do? The questions piled up in my mind, but the answers seemed as distant as the stars in the sky. The atmosphere at dinner was heavy, almost palpable, as if the air was saturated with unspoken words. Sophie and I sat at the table, surrounded by a silence that seemed to drag on, while the soft candlelight flickered, reflecting on our tense faces. I watched her, trying to read her emotions. Sophie always had a way of hiding what she felt, but there was something in her look that intrigued me, a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Thank you for coming," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice sounded soft, but there was an underlying firmness that didn't go unnoticed. I couldn't avoid it. "We need to clear this up," I replied, trying to stay calm. "You said you had something else to tell me." She took a deep breath, her fingers nervously playing with the napkin. "Yes, Miguel, it's about Lucas. You are not the only one who could be his father." The words came out of her mouth like a punch to the stomach. The world around me seemed to stop for a moment as I processed the revelation. "What do you mean?" I asked, incredulity shaping my tone. "Are you saying there could be another father?" Sophie nodded slowly, her expression becoming more serious. "Actually, I met someone else during a period when we were separated. And Lucas, he could be his son too. I didn't know how to tell you this, but I thought it was time to be honest." A whirlwind of thoughts invaded my mind. How should I feel? Relief? Anger? Confusion? "So, you're not sure who the father is?" "I'm not, Miguel. And, as much as it may hurt, I don't want you to feel that you need to take on this responsibility if he's not your son. But I also can't ignore the possibility that he might be." The tension between us was increasing, and I felt my heart racing. "And Lucas? How does he feel about all this?" "He doesn't know, Miguel. So far, he only knows me as his mother, and you as a possible father. I don't want this to hurt him." The concern in her voice was palpable, but I couldn't help feeling that the situation was becoming more complicated by the minute. Meanwhile, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Clara, asking where I was. The weight of responsibility became almost unbearable. "Sophie, I need to be honest with Clara. I can't hide this from her. She deserves to know." "I understand, but you need to be careful. Clara is at a delicate stage and may not react well to this. She may feel betrayed by you for not telling her earlier," Sophie warned. with a worried look. I know, but I can't keep living this lie. She needs to know that there's a brother, or that there might be a brother. Frustration took over, and I stood up from the table, starting to pace back and forth. And if she doesn't accept it, and if this destroys our relationship, then we will face it together. I will be here to support you, Miguel, Sophie said, standing up as well and placing a hand on my arm. Her touch was familiar, and I found myself lost in memories of a past I thought I had overcome. Silence settled again, but now there was a silent understanding between us. It was as if, for a brief moment, the weight of the situation became a little lighter. And if Clara finds out about Lucas through the internet, that would be devastating. I murmured, the worry growing in my chest. Sophie paused. If that happens, it will be even harder. We need to be proactive. You need to talk to her before anything changes. I took a deep breath, trying to gather courage. Right, I'll do that. But I don't know how to handle all this. I'm so overwhelmed. I know, Miguel, but you're not alone. We'll go through this together. Her look was a mix of hope and challenge, and for a moment, I felt a little stronger. I turned my gaze to the window, watching the city that continued to pulse outside, oblivious to my internal conflicts. Life went on, but I was trapped in a maze of emotions. And as the night progressed, I realized that the true battle was just beginning, not only with Sophie but within myself and, most importantly, with Clara. The sun shone brightly in the park, reflecting the confusion I felt inside. The smell of cut grass mixed with the aroma of popcorn and cotton candy, creating a scene that should be cheerful, but for me, was pure tension. I looked at Sophie, who was sitting on a bench, with Lucas beside her, playing with a small car. I was still trying to process everything that had happened in the past few weeks, and the idea of finally meeting my son. A reality I had never known existed left me in a state of nerves. Are you okay? Sophie asked, her eyes watching me with a mixture of concern and expectation. It's just that. I shook my head, trying to organize my thoughts. It's all very new. I understand. She sighed, looking at Lucas, who was focused on his game. He really looks like you, doesn't he? Yes, I murmured, feeling a lump in my throat. And if Clara doesn't accept it? I don't know, but we need to try. Sophie said, her voice firm and determined. He deserves to know you. I agreed, but the anxiety wouldn't leave me alone. What would I say to Lucas? How would I explain that I was his father, but hadn't been present in his life? Doubt consumed me. Suddenly, I heard hurried footsteps and a familiar voice cut through the air. Dad, Clara appeared, with the expression of someone ready for a confrontation. I didn't expect to see her here, and my heart raced in my chest. Clara, what are you doing here? I asked, trying to hide my surprise. What am I doing here? She repeated, angrily. What are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be with your new family? Sophie was silent, her eyes wide, while Lucas, oblivious to everything, continued playing. I felt the weight of tension in the air. Clara, it's not how things work, I began, but she interrupted me. It's not how things work? You told me she was just an old love and now you're here, as if nothing had happened. Clara was so upset that I could see tears forming in her eyes. I just wanted you to meet Lucas, I tried to explain, but she cut me off again. Meet Lucas? You want me to accept this? That you have another son? And what am I, then? Clara, please, I begged, but desperation took over me. Lucas, not understanding the situation, turned to me and asked, with an innocent smile, Are you my dad? A deep silence took over the park. Clara looked at me, outraged, while Sophie seemed paralyzed. Lucas's gaze was so pure and full of hope, and I didn't know how to respond. My voice failed and I felt lost. It wasn't just about being a father, it was also about being a good father. A present father. Of course it is. Sophie finally spoke up, looking at Lucas. But the situation is a bit more complicated, my love. Complicated? Clara shot back, her voice full of incredulity. You call this complicated? To me, this is a betrayal. I'm not betraying anyone. I defended myself, feeling the frustration grow. I'm just trying to understand all this. Lucas looked from one to the other, confused. "I just wanted you to be my dad," he said, his voice small, as if asking a favor. And at that moment, all my fears and insecurities became irrelevant. What I really wanted was to protect that boy, even if I didn't know how to be a father. I looked at Clara, who was about to explode, and then at Sophie, who seemed as vulnerable as I did. "Lucas," I began, trying to find the right words. I want to get to know you. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." "I will," Lucas responded, smiling. But looking at Clara, I realized that the road ahead would be much more complicated than I had imagined. The fight was just beginning, and I had to find a way to unite these two parts of my life. The silence that followed Lucas's innocent call seemed to echo inside me, as if time had stopped. I was paralyzed, looking at the boy who, in a moment of pure spontaneity, had called me Dad. The words sounded so strange and familiar at the same time, awakening in me an avalanche of emotions that I struggled to control. Sophie was by my side, her eyes shining with apprehension, and Clara, who had stormed in like a hurricane, stood a few steps away, with the expression of someone who had just seen her world collapse. "Lucas," I finally managed to say, my voice choked. "I need to talk to you. The truth is, things are a bit more complicated than they seem." I looked at Sophie, seeking a sign of support, but she was as nervous as I was. The boy looked at us, confused, and then at Clara, who stood with her arms crossed, like a barricade between us and the happiness that, for a brief moment, seemed possible. "Who are you?" Lucas asked, looking at Clara with a mix of curiosity and fear. "She's your sister," Sophie replied, her voice soft but firm. "And you, well, you might be Miguel's son, but that's not decided yet." I felt a chill in my stomach. "It's true, Lucas," I said, trying to be as transparent as possible. "Your mother and I had a past, but we don't know if I'm really your father. I just wanted to have a dad," Lucas murmured, the frustration and sadness showing on his small face. It hit me like a punch in the stomach. How could I be so selfish? There was a child in front of me, a child who just wanted love and a place to belong. "Listen, Lucas," I said, kneeling down to his level. "Regardless of everything, you will always be loved, both by your mother and by me, if I am indeed your father. And even if I'm not, that doesn't change how I feel about you. But I want a real dad," he replied, the frustration building in his voice. "Not someone who just shows up out of nowhere." Clara moved, and I could feel she was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation, but there was still a barrier between us. I needed a miracle to cross that chasm. "I know you're confused, and so am I," Sophie responded, her voice choked. "But there are things we need to clarify." Looking at Lucas, she continued, "Miguel isn't the only one who could be your father. There is another person in your life who might be, and that could change everything." My heart pounded in my chest. What was she insinuating? The past I thought I had left behind was rising before me again, and I didn't know how to deal with it. "Sophie, you don't need to," I began, but she interrupted me. "I do, Miguel. He deserves to know. Lucas, you have a biological father who isn't Miguel, but that doesn't mean he can't be part of your life if you want him to be." Her words hung in the air, and Lucas seemed more lost than ever. "But who is he? Why didn't you ever tell me?" The sadness in his voice broke my heart. Clara, who had been observing in silence until then, finally spoke up. "Why didn't you tell me, Dad? I don't understand. How could you keep this a secret?" Her anger and confusion were palpable, and I knew I needed to act. "Clara, I didn't know. I didn't know how to deal with this," I said, the sincerity clear in my words. "I didn't want to hurt you, but now I realize that the truth must be shared. We need to support each other, as a family." She looked at me, and I saw the struggle in her eyes. "Everything is so wrong. I just wanted things to be different." The despair in her voice broke my heart. "So did I," said Sophie emotionally. "No one here asked for this situation, but we can make something good out of it. We can all support each other." The tension began to dissipate, and slowly, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. I looked at Sophie and Lucas, then at Clara. The path ahead was foggy, but there was a light at the end of the tunnel. We needed to rise together, facing the past and building a future where we could all be a family, regardless of how it unfolded. Life is full of surprises, Lucas, I said, looking directly at him. And even if things don't go as we planned, we will always be here for you. All of us. And at that moment, I realized that, although the wounds of the past were still open, there was a chance for healing. A chance for love and reconciliation that, despite everything, was still possible.